To the first Life on Tap of 2015 fall semester. We have a great lineup for you guys. 5 Life on Taps this fall, and then a whole nother slate in the spring. And I'm very excited to kickstart us with the field of architecture and construction. The first speaker today is the founder of Petrine Construction, and he renovated this building that we're in. He built the chapel and the commons and the library and the gym, and is responsible for pretty much all the structures on campus. So without further ado, Mr. Frank O'Reilly.
Greetings, everybody. Hi, Mary. I have to. Oh, Rose. Sorry. Oh, wow. Bad dad. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Greg. For the last 30 years, I've been involved in residential and commercial construction and land development and other business ventures. I graduated in 1983 from Christendom, and to kind of give you a little perspective, well, actually, let me tell you a little bit more about some of the companies, some of the businesses. I've obviously got the construction firm, got a land holding company, an athletic club, storage business, and a vacation rental business. And just for those of you who are sort of interested in business, the last 2 have been recession-proof. The first 3, not so. So I feel a little bit of a fraud on a couple of counts tonight. I sort of have a feeling that there's a certain lack of modesty in getting up and talking about an ongoing business operation. It's sort of like being the parent of a young child and writing a blog on how to raise a family, and when there's no finished product in sight, or the story's not done yet. Secondly, I've never been able to kind of shake the sort of heterodox thought that work really is a direct result of the fall. And one of my favorite quotes, G.K. Chesterton quotes, is, "I never have enough of nothing to do." So and then lastly, I suppose I don't actually go to work dressed like this. So anyway, hopefully, maybe some of the things that I've gleaned over the years will resonate or be useful to you as you go through your own discernment process. But to give you an overview of, sort of set the stage for my own journey in my career in business, I arrived in Front Royal in 1979. I was one of a class of, I think, unlike this freshman class, I was one of a class of, let's see, how many of us were there? 18. 5 freshman guys and 13 freshman girls. My freshman roommates were Mr. Doug Briggs, who's now the head of the computer department here, and then one Mr. Walter Gennaro. So if you don't know who he is, you can talk to me afterwards, and I can tell you all kinds of stories. There were 52 students that first semester, and there were only 4 buildings here. And they were just served by a little gravel road that came in off of a road that was as yet unnamed. It was just Route 606, or if you had a mailbox, Rural Route 3. You couldn't drive all the way to Washington, D.C. or to Northern Virginia on I-66 because it wasn't finished yet. Mr. O'Haran was the Dean of Discipline. I didn't use euphemisms like student life, nice things like that. So, let's see. Let's see. Dr. Rice and Dr. O'Donnell, well, they just weren't, at least not as far as Christendom went. Regina Chaley, the building over there, was our commons. And Sarge cooked us eggs on a grill where Dr. O'Donnell's fireplace now stands. And so I'll give you a sense of what that was like. And on the scandalous front, I was telling some people earlier, we had co-ed dorms my first semester. The guys were in the quad, which is now Madonna Hall, in suites 1 to 5, and the girls were in suites 6 to 10. So we used to come out at night and have snowball fights there when there was snow on the ground and other hijinks. Anyway, jumping forward a few years, when it came time for my decision on what to major in, I had a conversation with my father in the infamous telephone booth. You know, I don't know if you guys know what telephone booths are, but there was one on the back of the now enclosed porch of the Regina Caeli, and it went something like this. Dad, you should think about majoring in philosophy. I'm going to insult, some people are going to be really upset here. I'm glad there's no teachers. Dad, you should think about majoring in philosophy. Son, I fall asleep in philosophy class. Dad, how about theology? That's the queen of sciences. No, I think, son, I'd rather do history. So that, I should mention now that my father was an MD. He was a neurologist. He was a pioneer in the field of nuclear medicine. He was a member of the Royal College of Physicians. He was a consultant to the VA and the NIH. And here he is telling me to study philosophy and theology. So he really believed in the value of what the Christendom education had, because there were so many, he saw so many problems in people that no longer knew how to think correctly. You know, he would call a lot of the people coming out of medical school just technicians, or if he was being really derogatory, plumbers, because they really just could do techniques and things that they had no capacity to think about ethical issues. And then we had the dumbing down of, you know, medical ethics with regards to abortion and even the definition of death. So he dedicated the last 6 years of his life to really trying to help Dr. Carroll establish this institution. And so anyway, so I did do history, but sorry, I've got to have some notes here so I stay on track where I'm going so I don't wander off. But anyway, after my Christendom graduation, I had a very bleak semester at George Washington University where I was doing pre-med, because I thought, you know, sort of that famous mathematics of regret. You don't want to be, you know, what you would do down the road if you could look back and say, man, I'm swinging a hammer and I could have been a doctor. What was I thinking? So I had a very miserable semester there because I was trying to discern if I should get married. And God was very kind to me, and after having a miserable time and spending a lot of time on my knees, I realized that I did want to get married, and that there was actually somebody that wanted to marry me. So, which was a big surprise, you know. So anyway, then the conversation that I had with my future father-in-law was quite decisive and went a bit like this, you know. To my prospective father-in-law, I said, you know, I'd like to marry Angelique. And he said, well, what are you going to do? So I said, I'm thinking about teaching history. And he said, where? And I said, well, probably Catholic high school. And he said, you can't raise a family doing that. Blah, 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 blah. And he gave me a very long list of all the expenses of raising a family. My wife was one of 12. So I said, okay, I'll do construction. Now, granted, I had that in my bag of tricks. I had started doing construction when I was a student, and when I had built my first couple houses in the summer times with another college schoolmate. So I owned a house, and I knew a little bit about construction, but that was really, you know, the case of having my priorities were how I was going to make a living. You know, it has to be of interest to you, but it's really an avocation. You know, your first vocation, as you learn in catechism and here, is to holiness. Your vocation in this life is maybe the priesthood, religious life, or to the married life. And So, having those priorities when you graduate and kind of understanding that is really helpful, because otherwise when you get out, you can feel really like the world is at your feet, and it's very limiting to make choices and to make commitments, because that is somehow limiting you. So I think that I had examples, good examples and bad examples of commitment and not commitment. And for me, it was a little easy to see and discern that, it was better to commit to something and stick with it in the long term than to just say chase after the fast buck. So if I had any sort of personal advice to you, it would be that if you have a passion for something and it's something you really want to work on in your life, then you should pursue it, and you have to follow your instincts in that area, with prayer and everything. God will show you the way. So it took then another, I had begun building houses already, so my avocation had been forming under my own feet. And I also thought it was important to learn about real estate, so I became a real estate agent as well. And so then I started doing all these various aspects of it. And I realized it took me several years to discern what I liked most about construction was design and land development. And it took me even more years then to realize that I was not a manager, but I was an idea guy and an entrepreneur. And there's a big difference, and it's very helpful if you can figure that out about yourselves early, because it's very rare that you can combine a good manager with an idea guy. They rarely exist in the same person. So I would suggest something like I'm blanking out, the Briggs-Meyer personality test. It's kind of interesting because it really tells you a lot about yourself. It's much more specific than just 4 temperaments. So it's worthwhile doing and trying to understand yourself. It also helps you as a person in business or in any kind of profession, understanding the kind of personalities that you're dealing with. So obviously, if I could redo anything in my education or add anything to my Christendom education, which has been invaluable for me, and making business decisions, ethical decisions about what I should do, what I can do, what I can't do, what's the appropriate way to treat employees and other people, is probably I would have done something more a little bit more in the way of business and accounting. So if you want to go into business, it's worthwhile to maybe get an economics minor in there somewhere. So anyway, I think that your questions are probably going to be a whole lot more interesting than what else I could say about all the various things in construction. So I'm going to bow out now, and if you have any questions later, I'll be happy to answer them. But yield the podium to Dean.
Thank you very much. And like Mr. O'Reilly said, there will be time afterwards, so you'll get a chance to talk to him about maybe how that process looks specifically as he tried to rein in all of his different ventures and focus on the one path. So I'd like to now bring up to the stage Mr. Dean Reineking. He was featured in the New York Times this past summer, not for his construction accomplishments and architectural accomplishments, but because of his wedding. So he might touch on that. But I've known Dean a long time. He's very driven, and he's currently working in DC, so he'll tell you a little bit about how he got there and how you can also prepare for that if you think that's your calling. Dean.
Thanks. Good evening. As Greg said, he and I were roommates when we were here at Christendom. We graduated here in 2009. So not too long ago. Most of the buildings, with the exception of the one back behind Regina Chaley, were here. And thanks to Mr. O'Reilly. And as I was in my senior year and deciding where to go, I decided to go do 2 years of Focus, which is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. And so I spent 2 years doing campus evangelization at the United States Naval Academy, and then another year at Mount St. Mary's in Annapolis. And those 2 years were actually fairly pivotal teaching me skills about fundraising, first and foremost, in terms of very practical skills, life skills, but also relationships and how to develop both personal and professional relationships. Things like time management became very important, and I learned how to keep a calendar, all this great stuff that you don't really have to do necessarily. You should be doing right now, but taught me a lot of those skills that have since helped me as I've gotten out into the field of architecture. As I finished up my time with Focus, I decided that I needed more education to pursue architecture, and I chose that as a sort of avocation to pursue, and that I wanted to raise a family and needed a means to do that. And I was passionate about architecture. I had been since my semester in Rome, and we took the introduction to art and architecture there. And so I needed the technical skills to do that, and so I applied to the University of Miami, University of Notre Dame, University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and I decided that University of Miami seemed like a good fit in terms of what they taught and also the possible connections that I would have coming out of there, and sort of did a little research on what firms hire out of this school, because that matters in a lot of graduate schools, and depending on what you want to do, it's important to know where you can get from that sort of springboard. So I just have a few points tonight, and then be happy to answer questions afterward. But specifically, I want to kind of keep it a little more general, because I get the feeling most of you in here probably are not going to be architects. Most of you will probably end up in any number of fields besides that. But all of you probably have questions about, how do I get to where I want to be? What do I want to be when I grow up? It becomes a very important question, a very real question your senior year. And so I think just 3 points. The first, really, that knowing what you want coming out of school as much as you can is a very, very critical component to living a fulfilled, happy existence after you graduate. It's a very real reality that this is not a cheap school to go to. A number of you probably have some debt. And these are very real things. So you do have a primary vocation, either to marriage, to the consecrated single life, or to religious life. But there's also very practical concerns that have to be met in order to pursue your vocation to the full. So knowing what you want, as much as you can determine that before you graduate, the better, because you're sort of in a little cocoon here, and you have the time to think about these things. And as soon as college debt starts rolling in, and rent, and all these things that you're not having to deal with right now kick in, you have a lot less time to really discern what you want to do. So I'd like to encourage you, discernment is not a process where you sit with a piece of paper. I encourage you to sit with a piece of paper, but don't just sit with a piece of paper and kind of write out what you want to do and think about this in sort of a closed environment. You need to get up, you need to call someone, you need to go see someone who does what you think you want to do. And if you're interested in something like construction, you call Mr. O'Reilly and you go to his office and you walk with him on the job for a day. You have the time to do that now. And I think that was one of the best things I ever did as I was thinking about architecture. I was encouraged by a high school counselor, even in high school I was thinking about it, to go visit one of the firms in Memphis where I grew up. And I did, and the owner of the firm was happy to sit with me for 20 minutes or half an hour and talk about the things he loved about his job. And this is a great opportunity as well for you to meet people in the field who, if you end up pursuing that field, later can become potential job offering. These people are in a position to help you out down the road, and they remember the fact that you took the time to come and see what they were interested in. And it can be a very career-changing opportunity that can come out of that. So discerning, go see those people, go talk with them, and it will give you content for your thought process as you decide, do I really want to go into the field of art, architecture, construction, teaching, just spending a little bit of time around people in those fields. If you can get an internship in one of these fields, even better, because then you get to actually experience what it's like to work in those fields day in, day out for a limited time period when you're not committed for more than a summer or maybe a winter break. And you really can get to see what these fields are like, and then you're in a much better position to make a decision. Do I actually want to pursue that direction? Especially knowing where you want to go. Skill development, once you've decided where you want to go, is kind of the next step in that process. And this is something I wish I'd known being at Christendom. Getting into architecture, you have to get a master's degree in architecture, and then you have to spend 5 years or so working in the field before you can actually be licensed and own your own company. So knowing that path and that trajectory kind of gives you the very practical considerations you have to make. What school do I go to? What firms could I work for? What type of work do the different firms that I might work for do? What are the people like in those firms? Do I like the people that work there? What's the social aspect of that place? Because you're going to be in a place for a long time, working possibly. You want to at least be tolerable with your coworkers. So making these decisions, thinking about things like grad school, you want to do your research well and find out what school is going to help me get the best skill sets that I need, but also the best connections. And so, for where I want to go. And all of this kind of presupposes that okay, I want to be an architect working in DC for this type of firm doing this type of work. That allowed me to decide the graduate school I wanted to go to, or the 2 or 3 that I applied to. And also which firms in DC I needed to be talking to when I was looking for jobs. And that's very much where your education here at Christendom is very helpful. You have the ability to think, which is not all too common when you get into the work world. So being able to think, being able to communicate with people is a second huge component, huge strength that Christendom graduates have in any field that they go into. Your ability to communicate both orally, but also in writing. It's a skill that not a lot of people have and not a lot of people do well. So you already start ahead of the pack with those 2 things as you go into any field. But finally, you're cultured. And I think being an interesting person in a workplace is invaluable. And being able to talk to your boss, being able to talk to your coworkers about things that are interesting and lively, it makes you able to relate to many more people than a lot of people who come out with just a technical training. And so those put you in a very good position when you walk into an interview to sit and to talk with someone who might be offering you a job that you really want, to connect with that person on a level, to make that connection that they then enjoy, and they decide, well, hey, that person stuck out over and above everyone else. And that brings me to my third point, which is that especially as you move towards senior year, and you decide what you want to do, you really need to network. Once you've decided, this is what I want to do, these are the places I want to work, I highly, highly encourage you to go and visit people in their offices before you're asking them for a job. So that starts right now. If you're a sophomore or junior, you can be doing this right now, helping yourself decide what you want to do. Mr. O'Reilly mentioned the recession in the building industries. That was a very difficult time. It was a very good time to be in school. It's a very difficult time to be coming out of school and getting a job. And I think probably the best recommendation I got was in my first year of graduate school, I had a 3-year program. Go visit as many firms as you can, find out what they do. And that helped me to decide, do I like what these guys do? Do I like the work they do? Do I like the people there? But it also got my face in front of them, so that when I called them 3 years later to ask for a job or an interview, I already knew who to talk to. I had met the people face to face. I'd gone and visited and shaken some hands and represented myself tolerably well. And so when it came time to interview with them, they were like, sure, come on in. We'd love to see you again. And I knew the names and I knew the faces. So networking and getting to know people, that's also the thing that a lot of people miss when they're looking for jobs, just on a very practical note. So when I walked out of graduate school, I had visited, I think 2, possibly 3 times. I visited 5 different firms in DC. And in an economy where some of my classmates didn't get a single offer, I got 5 offers from all of those people. Go and talk to the people. And when they're very interested in having someone, your name's going to come to mind because you walked in their front door. People who applied online, people who write an email, people who just phone call, don't get offers. So you need to go to their location, shake hands with some people, and just have a conversation. And do it without the pressure of there being this question of, okay, can I have a job at the end of it? Because then you'll be your most relaxed, you'll present yourself the best, and when it is time to ask that question, you'll have a relationship with these people. So I think that's my biggest advice that I think applies to everyone here, no matter what field you end up in, but particularly in the architecture and the building industries, networking be a huge advantage when you actually want to pursue your goals and what you want to accomplish when you graduate from Christendom. So that's my plug for interviewing, informational interviewing. And Greg should have plenty of information on that if you need to know how to do it. But on a side note, just a quick opportunity that my wife mentioned to me before I came out. She is a lawyer and works for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And so in law, you have the district courts, the appellate courts, and then the Supreme Court. So everything sort of moves up that pipeline. And she mentioned an opportunity that she thought might be applicable to Christendom. So I throw it out there to anyone who is interested in policy or law or really social justice issues. This past year, she's worked on cases relating to abortion, to the gay marriage legislation, lots of very interesting stuff. There's a group that does this called the Alliance Defending Freedom, and they have a college summer program that they do. The application's due in March, but they pay all expenses. You go out, it's like a couple-week program. I thought it was pretty interesting, and I thought that it might be applicable to some people here. So I mention it if you want to know more information about it, or you're interested in policy and stuff. Be happy to talk more with you about that afterward as well. So, thank you.
We do have a quick thank you for both of our guest speakers tonight. Before we do that, though, just want to say thank you so much for coming out. As Dean and Mr. O'Reilly said, networking is huge. So that's why we started up the Alumni Happy Hour in DC. So the last Wednesday of every month for everyone that is over 21. You guys can hop in a van, go out there, network with some of these people, shake a few hands, and do a little bit of that job research that they were talking about. And if at any time you want to come in and talk about the interview process, or you want to connect to more people in the architecture field, just pop in and let me know.